The other hatchlings were playing with loose stones near the cave mouth, rolling them off the ledge and listening to the crack below. Sora was not interested in stones. She had been watching the valley. From the upper ridge of the Karath Mountains, the human settlement looked like a scatter of brown boxes. Smoke rose from thin pipes. Tiny figures moved between the boxes in straight lines, which Sora had always found strange. Dragons moved in curves, following the wind and the ridge. Humans moved in straight lines, as if they had already decided where they were going before they started walking. She had watched them many times before, but today something was different. At the edge of the settlement, near the dry creek bed where the land flattened out before the canyon wall, a group of small humans had gathered under a stretched piece of cloth held up by 4 sticks. They were not moving in straight lines. They were sitting still, and at the front of the group, an old human was drawing something on the ground with a long stick. Sora stretched her neck. Her gold and silver scales caught the morning light. She was 12 years old in dragon count, which made her barely a thought in the long mind of her kind. Elder Roth, her grandfather, was 900 years old, and he sometimes forgot she existed for entire seasons. She looked back toward the convocation hall cut into the mountain face above her. The elders were inside, exchanging deep impressions of astronomical data and territorial philosophy. Hatchlings were not invited. Sora had been told to wait. She had been waiting for 3 hours. She looked back at the tiny class under the canvas shade. Then she climbed down the canyon wall. It took her longer than she expected because she was trying to be quiet, which was not a skill hatchlings were trained in. She pressed herself against the rock face and moved sideways, using her claws carefully. The canyon smelled like dry dust and something sharp that humans carried with them everywhere, a kind of mineral smell she had no name for. She found a boulder at the canyon edge, large enough to crouch behind, and she looked out from behind it at the class. There were 9 human children sitting in rough rows. The old one at the front had a kind face, deep-lined and patient. He was drawing shapes in the dirt. The children were looking at the shapes and then looking down at small flat objects in their laps, pressing something dark against pale flat surfaces. Sora stared. The marks they were making were tiny and precise. They were making the same marks the old one had drawn on the ground. They were copying, they were keeping the marks. She had never seen anything like it. When Elder Roth taught her, he pressed a warm surge of understanding directly into her mind, like light through water. There were no marks. There were no copies. The knowledge simply moved from his mind to hers. She could not imagine why anyone would draw scratches on a flat surface instead. And yet she could not look away. One of the children, a boy with dark hair and a worn brown jacket, looked up from his flat object. He had a habit of chewing the dark stick he was writing with, and he was doing it now while looking at nothing in particular. Then he looked directly at her. Sora froze. She was not hidden well. Her eyes were large and gold, and they did not blend into canyon rock. The boy did not shout. He did not run. He did not do anything for a long moment. Then he looked down at his flat object and turned it around so the marked side faced outward toward Sora and held it up. She had no idea what the gesture meant. She looked at the marks on the surface. They meant nothing to her, but the way he held it up, carefully, without fear, like he was showing her something he was proud of, stayed with her. Then the girl beside him leaned over and whispered something. She had a long braid and ink-stained fingers. She looked at the boulder, found Sora's eyes, and opened her mouth. What came out was broken and imperfect, but it was a shape Sora recognized. A greeting. A dragon greeting, mispronounced badly but recognizable, like a song played on the wrong instrument. Sora had not expected that. She had not expected any of this. She left, not in panic, but fast, her claws scraping the rock as she went back up the canyon wall and over the ridge. She did not stop until she reached her ledge above the convocation hall, where she sat and looked at the valley below. The class was still going on. She could see the canvas shade from here, a small pale square against the brown ground. She thought about the marks on the flat surface. She thought about the boy who had not run. She thought about the girl who had tried to speak her language. She thought about these things for the rest of the morning, while the elders debated things she was too young to understand. And when Elder Roth came out at noon and found her sitting quietly, he asked if she had caused any trouble. She said no. That was true enough. There was no class the next day. The canvas shade was rolled up and the sticks had been pulled from the ground. Davan found out later that a cargo lifter had broken down on the North Road and every able adult was needed to move the load by hand before the afternoon dust storms arrived. Old Odu had gone with them. So Davan was alone in the canyon with a notebook and nothing particular to do. He had come back because of the eyes behind the boulder. He knew what a dragon looked like. Everyone in the settlement did, in the way that you know what thunder looks like, even if you have never been struck by it. But knowing and seeing were different things. Those gold eyes behind the rock had not looked like thunder. They had looked curious. He sat on the flat stone near the dry creek and opened his notebook to a clean page. He was not waiting, that was what he told himself, he was just sitting. The sound came from above. A scrape of claw on stone, careful and slow, the way something large moves when it is trying not to sound large. Then a shadow crossed the ground in front of him, wide and short, and he looked up. The dragon hatchling was smaller than he had imagined from the day before. Her scales were gold at the edges and silver down the center of her back, like someone had pressed two metals together while they were still warm. She was about the length of two grown men laid end to end, which was small for a dragon and enormous for a canyon conversation. She stopped at the edge of the flat stone. She looked at the notebook. Davan held it up, same as yesterday. She came 2 steps closer, her head tilted to the right. He pointed to the page, then he pointed to a mark, a letter, and said it aloud. A. She did not move. He said it again, slower. A. Her throat made a sound. It was low and had too many layers to it, like several notes played at once. But somewhere inside it was a shape that was not entirely unlike A. Davan felt the back of his neck go strange. He turned the page and found the alphabet he had copied out last week as practice. He pointed to each letter and said it. She was silent through all of it. Her eyes moved from the page to his mouth and back to the page. When he finished, she made a sound. It was all 26 sounds in order, layered over each other in a way that was not human, but was also not wrong. He stared at her. She had heard it once. His hand was slightly unsteady when he turned to the next page and started drawing what he remembered of the marks she had scratched into the canyon rock the day before, from memory, which was imperfect. He got maybe 8 of them right before he ran out of clear memory. She watched him draw, then she picked up a stone from the creek bed, a flat one, and used the edge of it like a tool. On the boulder beside the flat stone, she scratched a shape, careful and deliberate, 14 shapes in total, each one precise. She looked at him. He copied all 14 into the notebook. It took him a while to get the proportions right. She watched his hand move, and once, when he got a curve wrong, she touched the stone surface beside his notebook, not touching the notebook itself, and drew the correct curve again. "Thanks," he said. Her head tilted the other way. He tapped his chest. "Davan." She made a sound, low, resonant, not quite the same, but clearly an attempt. He pointed at her. She made a different sound, shorter, that felt like it started at the back of her throat and came forward. He tried it. Sora. The look she gave him was the closest thing to a smile a scaled face could manage without having the right muscles for it. They were still sitting like that when Ren arrived. She had come looking for Davan because she had finished her chores early and was bored, and she stopped at the entrance of the flat stone area and went absolutely still. She looked at the dragon. The dragon looked at her. Ren was not easily frightened. She was easily amazed, which was different. She walked forward slowly and sat down beside Davan. She looked at his notebook. She looked at the marks on the boulder. She said the dragon greeting she had practiced, better this time, with the right pressure on the second syllable. Sora's ears moved forward. What followed was the strangest afternoon any of them had ever had. Ren led most of the language work because she had a better ear. Davan handled the notebook and kept careful record of every word they exchanged. By the time the light turned orange and the dust on the North Road was settling, Davan had 3 dragon words with rough phonetic spellings, and Ren had 5. Sora had, by conservative count, learned 61 human words and was using them in sequence. Walking home, Ren said that was not normal. Davan said he knew. Ren asked what they were going to do about it. Davan said he did not know yet, but that he was going to need more notebooks. Davan showed Odu the notebook on a Thursday. He did not plan it. He had been carrying it under his arm on the way to class when Odu met him on the path between the storage yard and the learning area, and the old man saw the bolder sketches on the open page and stopped walking. "Where did you get these?" he said. Davan told him. Odu sat down on the nearest crate. He was not a man who sat down suddenly, but he sat down suddenly now. He asked Davan to tell the whole story from the beginning, and Davan did, while Odu turned the pages and said nothing for a long time. He did not tell the governor, not yet. He said he needed to see for himself first. He cancelled class, which he had never done before, and told Davan to take him to the canyon. Sora was there. She had been coming back every day since the first afternoon. Odu stood at the entrance of the flat stone area and looked at the gold and silver hatchling sitting beside the marked boulder. Then he walked forward and sat down across from her. He pulled a folded piece of paper from inside his coat. He spread it on the stone between them. It was a star chart, hand-drawn, dense with notation, covering a section of the northern sky that Odu had been mapping for 30 years using the settlement's small telescope. Sora looked at it for a long time. Then she reached out with one claw and touched a point near the upper right. She made a sound. Then she scratched a mark beside the point that was not in the chart. Odu leaned forward. "What is that?" Sora did not have enough human words yet for a complete answer. What she managed was, "Old light, 200 years old. Your device cannot see it yet." Odu was quiet for a while. Then he pulled out a pencil and drew 3 more points on the chart. He looked at her. She touched one of them and shook her head slightly. She touched the other 2 and nodded. They spent 2 hours like that. No shared language beyond fragments. A pencil, a star chart, and a lot of patience. Davan sat to the side and wrote everything down. Meanwhile, on the mountain, Sora had already started a different conversation. She had gone to her mother Nessa 2 evenings before, and she had used the careful, structured approach that Elder Roth always said was the mark of a mind worth listening to. She laid out what she had seen, the marks, the copying, the flat objects that carried knowledge across time because humans could not carry it in their minds the way dragons did. Nessa listened, then she said that the convocation would not allow it. Sora asked what exactly would not be allowed. Nessa said hatchlings spending time with flickerfolk, learning in their manner, it was not the way. Sora said she was not asking to learn their way. She was asking whether it might be useful if both sides could ask each other questions in the same place at the same time, with someone writing the answers down so neither side would forget. Because dragons lived long enough to afford forgetting, but humans did not, and that meant every human who died took something with them that dragons had never thought to collect. Nessa said nothing for a while. Sora said she thought they were each other's missing record, and that neither side had noticed because they had never been in the same room long enough to check. Nessa said she was 12 years old. Sora said she knew. Nessa said this was not a small idea. Sora said she knew that too. Roth found out 3 days later, not from Nessa, but from a younger elder named Fyron who had heard a rumor from a hatchling who had seen Sora coming down the canyon wall. Roth went to the canyon himself, alone, late in the afternoon when Odu sometimes came to sit and read. He found the old man there. 2 enormous beings sat across from each other on the flat stone. Between them, the star chart. Around them, 6 weeks of accumulated marks on the boulder face, dragon glyphs and human letters side by side. They had almost no common language. Roth knew perhaps 30 human words. Odu knew perhaps 20 dragon sounds. Roth pointed to a section of Odu's chart. Odu nodded. Roth scratched a new mark into the stone, a complex glyph Sora had not used before. Odu stared at it, then opened his notebook and began writing underneath it, slowly, translation by inference. They did not speak, they just worked. When the light faded, Roth stood up. He looked at the boulder covered in dual-language marks. He looked at the old human sitting below him, patient as stone himself. Roth did not say the idea was good. He did not say he approved. He said, "The hatchling, she sees something." Odu looked up. He said, "Yes." Roth left. Odu stayed until the first stars appeared, the same stars Sora's people had been watching for 9 centuries, the same stars his people had mapped in exile on a borrowed world. He wrote one line at the bottom of his notebook page. It said, "We have been neighbors for 200 years and have wasted most of them." The document was 4 pages long. It was written in human standard on the left half of each page and annotated in dragon glyphs on the right half. Every glyph had a phonetic note underneath it in Davan's handwriting, and every paragraph had been argued over for 3 evenings in the canyon until all 3 of them agreed the meaning, crossed cleanly from one side to the other. It was titled simply, "A Proposal for a Shared Place of Study." Davan carried it to Governor Breck's office on a Tuesday morning because Odu said that Tuesday was when she was least busy and most likely to read something carefully. He had Ren with him. They stood at the front desk and asked to leave something for the governor. The clerk looked at 2 children holding a handwritten document and said she would pass it along. Breck read it that afternoon, then she read it again, then she called Odu in. "Did you write this?" she said. Odu said the children wrote most of it. He had helped with structure. She looked at him over the paper. "It has dragon script in it." He said yes. She said, "Correct dragon script." He said he believed so, yes. She put the paper down and looked at the wall for a moment. "What are the odds this ends badly?" Odu said he thought the odds were lower than she might expect, and that the potential upside was larger than she was currently imagining. She said she would think about it. Odu said, gently, that thinking was good, but that a dragon hatchling had already started moving stones in the lower canyon, and that someone would notice eventually. Breck looked at him sharply. He looked back with the same patient expression he had used for 40 years of teaching. On the mountain, the conversation was less calm. Elder Dos was a violet dragon who had been part of the convocation for 300 years, and he had opinions about everything, which he expressed at length. He said that allowing hatchlings to spend structured time with flickerfolk would slow their development. He said that dragon knowledge was passed through impression for good reason, that the mind-to-mind method carried not just information, but understanding of how to hold it, and that sitting beside a small human copying marks onto flat paper was not a substitute. No one disagreed with the first part. Elder Fyron, who was blue and younger than Dos by a century, said that was all true, and also that Elder Roth had come back from the canyon with 47 corrected data points in his personal astronomical record. Corrections he had not been able to make in 60 years of solo observation, and that perhaps the method was not the only question worth asking. Dos said the method mattered. Fyron said the results mattered too. They went around like that for 2 hours. Then a hatchling was brought in. Sora had not been summoned. She had asked to speak, which was itself unusual. And the convocation had allowed it in the way that adults sometimes allow a child to speak, because they expect to hear nothing important and do not want to seem unkind. She stood in the center of the hall. She was small and gold, and she looked up at all those enormous ancient faces looking down at her, and she did not flinch. She said, every year the flickerfolk write down something their grandparents knew, because if they do not, it disappears when the grandparent dies. Every year we forget something the flickerfolk figured out, because we never thought to ask them. We are each other's library, and neither of us has ever walked inside. There was a silence. She said, I am not asking to stop learning from you. I am asking to also learn beside them. It is not the same thing. She left. Hatchlings did not wait for deliberation. In the canyon the next morning, Breck came by herself. She walked to the flat stone area and stood looking at the marked boulder and the rough outline someone had chalked on the ground showing where walls might go. Then she turned around and found Elder Roth standing at the canyon edge above her. He had not made a sound coming down. 900 years of movement, and he was still quiet when he wanted to be. They looked at each other across the space between them. Breck was a practical woman. She had spent 12 years running a settlement with too few resources and too many opinions. She knew the look of something that was going to happen whether people approved or not. She had learned to get in front of those things before they got complicated. She raised her hand, open palm. Roth lowered his head slowly. Then he extended one claw, just the tip of it, and touched the air in front of her palm. It was not quite a handshake. It was not quite a bow. It was two very different beings acknowledging that they were, in this moment, in the same place for the same reason. The convocation voted the next week. Not yes. It voted to permit a single-season observation of what the proposal called a shared gathering. Governor Breck signed the matching authorization the same afternoon. It was the smallest possible yes. Sora, when she heard, sat very still for a moment. Then she looked at Davan. Davan looked at Sora. Ren was already measuring the ground with a piece of string. Nobody official helped build it. That was important to note because the structure that went up over 6 weeks at the canyon boundary was not small, and it was not simple, and it could not have been built without help. It just could not have been built without help from people who were willing to not be seen helping. Davan's mother was an engineer. She did not visit the building site. She did, however, leave a set of load-bearing calculations on the kitchen table one morning with a cup of water holding the pages flat so they would not blow away. Davan took them with him. Elder Roth did not visit the building site either. He did spend several evenings resting on the canyon ledge directly above it, from which vantage point 3 young dragon hatchlings happened to lift and place very large stones in very precise configurations. The hatchlings were Sora's friends. They did not explain why they kept getting the angles exactly right. Ren designed the sign. She carved it into a flat piece of canyon stone and painted the letters in human script on the top half and asked Sora to add the dragon glyphs on the bottom half. Sora pressed the marks in with careful clawwork. The sign read nothing grand. It said, "Bring what you know, leave knowing more." The first morning arrived in the way that important mornings do, with too much silence before they begin, and then suddenly everyone is there at once. 4 dragon hatchlings came down the mountain path in a cluster, staying close together the way young things do when they are uncertain. 9 human children came from the settlement side, some accompanied by parents who stayed at the canyon entrance and pretended to be looking at the rocks. The building had no door. It had an open wall on both sides to allow for the size difference. Inside, the floor was flat stone. On one side, cushioned mats for humans. On the other side, open stone ground for dragon comfortable resting. A central space where both sides could see each other clearly. Nobody moved for almost a full minute. Then Davan walked to the center of the room and sat down on the floor. He opened his notebook. The room came to life, slowly, but it came. Odu stood at the front and asked a question. He asked it in both languages with Sora's help for the dragon half. The question was, what is one thing your people understand that you believe the other side could never learn? The room went quiet again for a different reason. A green hatchling named Bolt spoke first. He had a round face and very bright copper eyes, and he explained, through Sora translating, how dragons felt the magnetic pull of the planet in their chest bones. They used it like a map. They could feel storm fronts coming because the field shifted, a sensation like pressure changing in a closed room. A human girl named Ray listened very carefully. Then she pulled a small device from her pocket, a pocket compass, and held it up. She explained that humans had built a small tool to feel the same thing because they could not feel it naturally. The needle moved because of the same force Bolt felt in his bones. She showed him how it worked. He watched the needle swing toward north and did not look away for a long time. "Same thing," he said finally, in careful human words. "Different body." After that, the room was less quiet. Sora taught the dragon memory method as best she could translate it, not the full impression that crossed mind to mind, but the structural shape of it, how dragons organized an idea before they put words to it. They built the container first, then they filled it. She drew the method as a diagram on the stone floor. 3 human children tried it with the next thing Odu taught them, a mathematical principle they had already heard but never quite held. One of them, a quiet girl named Feli, who sat in the back of every class and rarely spoke, went still for a long moment. Then her eyes went wet. Odu knelt beside her. "What happened?" She said she had been carrying that idea for 2 years. She had repeated it correctly in every test. She had never known what it meant until this moment. The room was quiet around her in the good way, the way rooms go quiet when something real has just happened. Outside, near the canyon wall, Elder Roth passed by during the late morning. He had come down from the mountain on an errand that had nothing to do with the school, which was what he told himself. He moved slowly. He did not stop. He did slow down. Through the open wall of the building, he could see Sora sitting with a human boy, both of them bent over a notebook, both of them pointing at the same mark. He could not hear what they were saying. He did not need to. He continued up the path. At the end of the afternoon, when the children had gone and the hatchlings had gone back up the mountain, Sora and Davan sat outside on the flat stone the way they had been sitting since the first day. The canyon was cooling. The twin moons were barely visible in the pale sky. Davan asked her why she had done all this. She thought about it for a while, which was her habit when the question was real. She said, dragons lived long enough to afford being slow. Humans lived briefly enough that they could not afford being wrong. She had thought that maybe together they could be neither. He wrote that down. She watched his hand move across the page, the same familiar motion she had watched from behind a boulder on the first day. She realized, watching him, that she had wanted to be written down, to be in a notebook somewhere in careful marks, so the idea would not disappear when she did. Even dragons, who remembered everything, wanted to be remembered. 6 months is a short time if you are 900 years old. Roth had lived through storms that lasted longer. He had watched coastlines change over centuries and considered that a moderate event. 6 months was almost nothing. And yet, he sat on the high ridge and looked at his personal record, which he kept not in marks on paper, but in the deep memory that all dragons carried, and he counted what had changed in it since the school opened. 47 corrected stellar positions from his first meeting with Odu. 12 new material properties he had not known about the canyon stone, told to him indirectly through Sora, who had learned them from the human engineer who never officially visited the building site. 3 new observations about Verath's magnetic field from young Bolt, who had been comparing his natural sense against Ray's pocket compass every morning for 4 months, and had begun drawing maps that neither species had produced before. Also, a human child named Feli had been brought to the settlement doctor 6 weeks ago. She had mentioned in class, almost as an aside, that she sometimes felt the ground wrong, like it moved when it did not. The doctor had dismissed it, but Sora had heard, and she knew what that description meant in Verath's native biology. She had told Odu. Odu had told the doctor in terms the doctor could not ignore. The child was treated in time. Roth was not given to sentiment. He was 900 years old, and he had learned that sentiment clouded accounting. But he was honest in his accounting, and the accounting was clear. The convocation gathered on the last day of the permitted season. Elder Doss came prepared with arguments. Elder Fyron came prepared with a written summary of documented outcomes, which no dragon had ever done before, the format borrowed from human practice. Doss said the dragon impression tradition had not been protected. Fyron said the tradition had not been harmed, and that 9 hatchlings now had stronger foundations in Verath natural science than any previous hatchling group at the same age. Doss said the method was not pure. Fyron said the results were real. They went around for a while, then Roth spoke, which he rarely did in open session. He said 4 words, "The hatchling was right," and then he was silent again. The vote passed, not unanimously, but it passed. Breck's council meeting was shorter. She laid out 3 documented cases where the school had produced measurable benefit to the settlement. The one council member who voted against said he was not opposed to learning, only to depending on dragons for it. Breck said that was a fair concern and also not what was happening, and they could discuss it at the next meeting. He was satisfied with that, or at least not unsatisfied. The settlement approved continuation, permanent, with annual review. Odu found Sora the following afternoon at the Canyon School. He sat down across from her and told her he wanted to write the first shared curriculum, a document, he explained, that would organize what both sides knew into a form that either side could study, in both scripts, from both frames. He said he wanted her help. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Then she asked what a curriculum was, because she had never heard that exact word. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is what I built. I just did not have the word for it." Odu smiled. He opened his notebook. "That is usually how the important things happen," he said. That evening, Sora climbed back to the high ridge where the story had started, the same ledge above the convocation hall where she had sat on that first morning, watching the settlement from above and seeing a small pale square of canvas where something interesting was happening. The canvas was gone now. There was a stone building in its place, low and open-sided, with a flat sign at the entrance and light marks on the canyon floor from 6 months of small feet and heavy claws coming and going. She heard Roth before she saw him, the particular sound of his movement, slower than it used to be, heavier, 9 centuries walking on stone. He came up the ridge path and settled beside her, vast and bronze and old in a way that made the mountain itself seem young. He looked at the valley, she looked at the valley. After a while he said, "You have done a strange thing." She said she knew. He said, "It may matter for a long time." She did not say anything because she did not need to. She knew what a long time meant from a dragon who had seen 900 years of it. He was not giving her a compliment. He was giving her an accounting, and his accounting was honest, and that was worth more. He shifted his wing over her. It was vast and warm and covered her completely, the way the mountain covered the valley, without trying, without thinking about it, because it was just the shape of the thing. She was small under it, and she did not mind. Below them, in the morning that was already building itself for the next day, the Canyon School sat at the boundary between 2 worlds that had been neighbors for 200 years, without ever really meeting. It was not large, it was not famous yet. The sign on the front was crooked because Wren had carved it freehand, and the stone was harder on the right side. But the door, such as it was, the open space in the wall where neither side needed to duck or squeeze or make themselves less than they were, faced both directions. And in a few hours, 10 children and 4 hatchlings would walk through it again. Which was, when you thought about it, how everything that ever lasted had always started. Small, ordinary, and completely unwilling to stop.